Okay, it's recorded.
Woo.
Wonderful. Well, very good. Now let me get that going. And everything. Okay, as I might have guessed last week, I could not get the Buddhism quiz done. And thank you, Ian, for already giving me sufficient guilt with your with your discipline concept from last week. So I really appreciate that. We will come back to that at the end because that's sort of the key to all this. Anyway, I'm just going to cancel it. We've got too much to do, both from major projects to have that ready. So I'm just going to have to live with that. Okay. So sorry. It is valuable. You never realize that until you're long past your educational life. But there is a value to quizzes. Even though you just, the stress. But the stress to build them is amazing too. So next week we'll do presentations. Any problems with that from looking at your calendars?
Sounds good.
Okay. And I sure wish I'd have found this beforehand. But I've added a reading I'd love for you to do, and just as we come to next week, love for you to get this down. It's a reading from the Atlantic, and I've become a real Atlantic reader lately. I found their content to be very, very meaningful. And this is a story from India of a person that goes to a bird hospital. And after they discover the bird, what it's like to be in the midst of a bird hospital, they discover that the founder was a Jain. And so it becomes this really wonderful illustration of the power and practicality of Jain thought. And so I really enjoyed it, and I didn't find my quote until today, actually. But I'd love for you to read it. It is just such a meaningful quote. My sadness is this book finally arrived, Living Jainism. It looks good, but I certainly don't want to impose it on you this late. But I do find it valuable. And so if you're interested in Jainism, I'd add this one to your library. I have very, very few books on Jainism, so anything is good. So I'll just sort of leave it at that. I would open the conversation just with this sense. Why would the Atlantic publish an article that deals with a bird hospital and Jainism?
Bird hospital?
A bird hospital in India.
Well, I could see how Jainism would be linked to it in the sense of the, non-violence and taking it a step further and actually, obviously not harming them, but helping animals, the birds. I get the impression that there's maybe something about the bird that might be extra special or symbolic to Jainism.
Okay.
I don't know. That's all I got.
Good start on getting our heads back into Jainism. Any other thoughts? Kate, what has your work in Jainism helped you to understand health and healing of birds?
Mm-hmm. Well, from what I know about birds is they're a bit more temperamental. They're very sensitive to their environment, and they're really particular about where they will and they won't live, very habitat specific. So, I mean, they're also good indicators of forest health and that type of thing when you're looking at it from an ecological perspective. And they also face a lot of difficulties in the current world with the pressures from, I mean, you know, windows on buildings kill a lot of birds. Cats, house pets, kill a lot of birds. So it's like maybe just by that existing, it's helping the bird populations probably more than we can understand. That's just what I'm thinking.
It's really insightful.
Even in my very short reading of Living Jainism, it forced me to rethink my definition of spirituality. I don't know if I can find it quickly, but I've got to rethink it. I don't know. I wasn't reading it with my pen, so my apologies. I don't know if I can. I always read with about 3 or 4 pens in my hand, so that I don't have to do this. So I'll just try and maybe it. I think I've got it. Science, and they're initially beginning to define science and spiritual. Our healthcare has been very scientific. The Indian healthcare system is much more spiritual. But then the Jains say, well, what's your definition of spirituality? So here's your definition of science. For science, we encompasses what we've learned to call the physical sciences. But they would like for us to really think of science under its Latin cognate, which is to know. And it is the quest for the pursuit of knowledge everywhere. And so they want to push us harder to make sure that we're thinking of philosophy and psychology and artistic and creative impulses and aspects of existence that it can't be measured or quantified. So not only are they wanting to really rethink what science is, but they're wanting to now rethink what is spiritual. For spiritual, we define equally broadly as the domain beyond immediate and conventional understanding, principally the hidden connection that exists within the universe as a whole and the planet we inhabit. And I just sort of read that and went, wow, that's a lot broader than I think of as spiritual. When I come to the thinking of spirituality, I'm thinking me, my spirituality. I might get so broad as to think of the spirituality of my family. I might get really broad and think of the spirituality of my community. Okay, I've lived there a lot. I certainly don't think of spirituality as the universe. Let me read it again. The hidden connections that exist within the universe as a whole and the planet we inhabit. Okay, your first response to their definition of spirituality.
That's a good reframe. Because why would spirituality exclude anything?
Good.
Like it's all a part of creation, and
Good.
Spirituality can give us a view of creation and the purpose of life, and to me that feels all-inclusive, and I relate to you in the sense of like a lot of the times I'm looking at spirituality through the sense of I. Like, how do I relate to spirituality and to the world around me?
Because Kate, you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I really enjoy that perspective. It's because to me, spirit is all encompassing. So it's the whole, it's all of us together. And I just think that's really cool.
Can we argue that our context in the American context, and now that we're shifting presidencies from an emphasis on America primarily back into a more globalized, world-centric way of thinking, that we can rebuild a framework of climate change, climate awareness, understanding what our role and responsibilities are in the climate, seeing if there's anything reasonable that we can do within our own context, let alone what can I do in my life. I think I've got to get there because I haven't been there. And I think Jainism is demanding of me that I think broader in my own spirituality. And so I've got to get there. It'll be interesting, but I got to get there. Final comment on that idea of spirituality?
I think it's interesting to think about the existence of spirituality and the universe without us in it. It's like, how do the elements, how do planets and stars and, you know, maybe some microorganisms, like how do those things sit in spirituality in that container?
Yeah. That's what Jainism does. They think in broader and yet in a microscopic context. They built their spirituality, the Jain spirituality, is attempting to consider those things. Now, how does your memory of Mahavira from last week force you to think about the broader cultural context, but also the microscopic? What in his biography from last week informs that?
Well, he carried a broom with him.
Okay.
So, you know, on a microscopic level, he's literally, you know, trying not to harm these little bugs and stuff that are on the ground, or even in the air. Okay. And
okay, good. So his awareness of bugs, his awareness. Remember how our skin crawled when you learned that Mahavira didn't like to wash? Do you remember that point? He didn't like to wash. Why? Because he had an awareness of the microscopic. Even this is 550 BCE we're talking.
Yeah. Wow.
And he's got an awareness of the microscopic that we don't get in our culture until the 18th century. And so that's got to be an interesting way of seeing the world. If you were walking down, a street in India, and you saw this, what would you assume?
There's a pandemic. But I know
Before
why.
the pandemic, if you saw this, what would you assume?
Well, I don't know what I would assume, but I know why they wear them.
Who?
The Jains?
A Jain. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this is almost the symbol of a Jain. Why?
Because of microscopic life in the air that they don't want to breathe.
Because there's microscopic life in the air that they appreciate. And so now everybody in India wears a mask, but before the pandemic, you knew you were encountering a Jain when you saw the mask. Isn't that interesting? They're way ahead of us when it comes to protecting themselves and their community around them by wearing a mask. So there's all these little ways that I'm just fascinated by this religion. It just intrigues me to no end. They think much bigger. And so in their worlds of meaning, they have an ultimate reality that is as comprehensive as most people's. It's the eternal universe. But when they think about it, they don't end up at the same place we often end up. Their liberation is not going to be found by a God or a creator. And they like to think of themselves as trans-atheistic, bigger than atheistic. Do you want to toy with that for a minute? We typically call Jains atheists. Well, that's not a nice title in America. They say that if there's anyone a family does not want their daughter to marry, it's an atheist. It's worse than if you're a Muslim, if you're you name your religion, Jehovah's Witness, a Mormon. It's worse than all those if you come home with an atheist. Okay? Now, I don't know how your family context might have reacted if you'd have tried to do that. But they say that's the worst thing you can bring home in America, is an atheist. Well, now we're going to study a religion that completely rejects God as a religion. And so the term atheistic doesn't quite work for them because of our negative assumptions towards atheism within the American context anyway. And so the way that they like to define themselves are trans-atheistic. It isn't that there is no God. It just makes no sense at all to think about it. So their God rejection is bigger than even the no God. And so here's something from Mahavira's thought. If God created the world, where was he before creation? If you say he was transcendent then and needed no support, where is he now? If he is ever perfect and complete, how could the will to create have arisen in him? If, on the other hand, he is not perfect, he could no more create the universe than a potter could. If out of love for living things and the need for them he made the world, why did he not make creation wholly blissful, free from misfortune? Know that the world is uncreated, as time itself is, without beginning and end, and is based on the principles, life, and the rest. Uncreated and indestructible, it endures under the compulsion of its own nature. Whoa! Studying the Jains is tough because they completely undercut the God complex that informs American thought. Whew. Thoughts on that one?
Honestly, I feel like it seems very logical and kind of practical. Doesn't feel so. It makes, to me, it gives spirituality a feeling of like realism, and not this like far-fetched idea of, or like, you know, you might picture a god or this like enlightened being that's, you know, like the universe is its potting wheel. Yeah, I kind of, it resonates with me a little bit.
Okay. Kate, how are you responding to this undercutting of theism?
Yeah, well, I think it really resonates with the idea of spirituality that they have too, of just this like entire universe that just is existing, and it's just what it is, and it makes sense with rejection of maybe a creator or an end, where it's existing, and there's the microcosm which exists in the macro, and it feeds on itself. It just goes back and forth. It makes sense.
Where did theism struggles with where to put moral responsibility? Does Jainism have the same struggle? Let me explore my first part of that. If God created us, is God responsible for us? If I create something, I have a responsibility for something. If I create an artificial intelligence and it destroys the world, am I not responsible for the artificial intelligence that I've created? Therefore, the God complex always creates a moral responsibility problem, in the sense that, is God responsible for all the actions of the creation that's attributed to him? And so that's the challenge, is to create moral responsibility in the created as opposed to the creator. And so you have to sort of begin with the problem of a creator, and then begin to work on a solution that says a good creator would impose moral responsibility on the created. Have I moved you? Have I lost you? Are you sensitive to that problem that a creator of necessity has?
Yeah. Well, and maybe that's why nonviolence is so central to them, because when there's not someone else to put that responsibility onto, it falls onto you alone in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have that problem that theism must struggle with. So Jainism, because of their atheism, trans atheism, puts it all on you. You need to solve the problems of the world. You need to be sensitive to the universe. You need to be sensitive to the issues of the universe, and you better figure out how you fit in them, because part of how you fit is how you change and improve it. So it's an interesting religion to study because of its lack of theistic engagement. Buddhism as well, I would call non-theistic. And so, because it just says, leave it alone. It just doesn't have a point, there's no point to study it. It's not practical right now. The Jains, they really want to make a point here. And I think they make it strongly. Okay, so as long as you understand why having no supreme God or creator actually makes the moral climate more difficult for the Jains, because it's all on them. They worship the Jinas as conquerors who now enjoy liberation, not as gods. And that's going to be tough, because when you see their practices and how they venerate the Jain statuary, it really looks like worship as a god. But again, that's the challenge of studying something intellectually and then trying to compare it to how people actually practice it. The world operates, as we discovered from my reading, under its own laws and eternal cycles. Again, even our science is trapped with a beginning, the Big Bang, and the Big Bang struggles with how do you create something out of nothing. Our theism has the same struggle. Who is God before creation? And so Jains, because of their cyclical thought, don't have that struggle, and that gives them some freedom there. When you look at their cosmology, you get some interesting ways that they answer the question, "Mommy, what's real?" Well, It starts at a lower level where there's 8,400,000 hells and hell beings. Okay. You have the middle level where humans and animals live. You have the upper level where God's always young and beautiful. And then you sort of stop and go, I thought we just said there's no gods. And you sort of go, okay, but we've lived with a history of humanity that has gods. So at least they have a crown, which is the crescent-shaped home of the liberated souls. So there's sort of a floating here. As you can imagine, the ancients always sort of assumed we lived on a flat plane. Underneath that plane was something, and above that plane was something. But the flat plane of what people were aware of had a parallel universe in the divine where the gods lived. And so within Jainism, you get that interesting, if I'm light enough, I float to that next space. And so you get the home of the souls. Obviously, it has resonance with what Judaism and Christianity and Muslim thought dealt with heaven. That for most of Christianity, again, I'm going to assume it's similar in Judaism or in Islam, but you had that sense that if your soul was light enough, it would float past Saturn to where heaven was, because they could see Saturn, and they knew of Saturn's existence. So they assumed that you had to make your soul light enough to make it float. And when it got past Saturn, it got to heaven. It was an interesting cosmology that the ancient Christians sort of had to think of. But it just answers that that sense of where does my soul, what happens to my soul? So this is sort of the way they've come up with it. And it's always sort of fascinating to see that. Response to their cosmology? You're encountering hell for, I think, the first time, is it not?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
actually a good point.
This is the first time we've talked about hell.
Yeah.
And so the Jains are going to use hell as a concept, and they're going to be aggressive with it. What's the moral impact of hell?
Well, hell is where you go when you do really bad stuff.
Okay. And if you're a hell being and you've spent a life doing really bad stuff, how does karma and reincarnation work into this?
Well, you'll keep coming back
Right?
in worse and worse form each time.
Okay. And their worst form that they could think of is a hell being. So the Jains are creating I think we lost Ian there somewhere.
I think so.
He's still here.
Yeah.
I think we lost Ian. He must have run out of battery or something happened there. I hope he finds us again.
Yeah.
And so do you understand, does it sort of make sense that the hell concept is by definition a moral concept where the humans around you are trying to encourage you not to be a bad person?
Yeah.
Okay. If you were to walk down the street and interview 100 people in your town, how many of them would agree that there's a hell?
98% of them,
Do
probably.
you think so?
I mean, I'm living in Bountiful right now, so it's...
Oh, you're in a unique place. Let's take you back to McCall then.
Okay.
Now you've gone through 100 people in McCall. How many of them believe that there's a hell that they're worried about?
Probably 50%.
I think you're quite right. Yeah. But isn't that an interesting comparison? So that what religion does is make you aware of a worse place that you might arrive in so that you'll be a better person today.
Yeah.
And the real challenge of the American psyche is, I bet it's 30 to 40% worry about hell in the American context. I think, McCall's sort of half and half. I agree with you. And so the concept of hell, which was the dominant mechanism that America transformed itself, both in the 1700s and the 1800s, they made everybody worry about hell. And that sort of drove them back into the churches, because they decided that life was terrible and they were living a tough and terrible life. And if they didn't have the churches, then they didn't know how to get away from hell. And it's an amazingly powerful moral tool to get people to change. It's a tool we don't use very much in America right now. But the Jains use it. Why? Because they're trying to put much more pressure on today and how you're living your life and being worried. Remember when we were talking about Hinduism, we sort of talked that they might reincarnate as a monkey or a cow or all of those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that was sort of where we placed our reincarnation, is we were worried about coming back as a cow or a monkey or those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not a lot of pressure. Here comes Ian. That's good. That's not a lot of moral pressure, because cows are okay, monkeys are okay. The Jains, hell being, that's a lot of pressure. Welcome back, Mr. Ian.
Good to be back.
We're talking about hell and why we don't talk about hell very much.
Okay.
And Kate made an assumption, if she were to walk down the street and talk to 100 people, in Bountiful, she'd get 90% of people talking about hell. If she did the same thing in McCall, she'd get about 50% of people talking about hell, that would think that hell exists and it's something they worry about. And so the question is, how has society used hell as a moral leverage for them to accomplish something in the todays? And then we've discovered that with Jainism, because they're now talking about hell, they're using it as a moral lever to really get something done in their society. Because in the Hindu society, you remember, we talked about cows and monkeys and those kinds of things they might come back to.
Mm-hmm.
Jains, you might come back as a hell being. Don't want to do that, because my next life can't be good if I'm a hell being. So it's going to take me millions of lives. And how do you become a really good hell being so that you can escape it? So you don't want to go there to start with.
Right.
So live a better life this life. Does that make sense, everybody?
Totally.
How hell works as
Yeah.
a moral
Yeah.
lever?
Well, and with the Jains being so extreme, this makes sense that they would bring this idea of hell into their religion, because you want to be really, really, really good, really, really, what am I trying to say? It's the ascetic, it's really just being so minimal, and it's the extreme of the extremes, really, is what
So
it comes
now
down
what
to.
can you say about the American moral pressure? If we don't have hell in our conversation, which precious few of us do, how much pressure do we put on each other to live a better life?
Well, there's not much.
Not much.
Yeah.
And I think we find that when when this existence becomes hell, essentially, when you're suffering day to day, that becomes the hell that we live in.
Yeah.
With no change and no pressure to be good.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah. I get this, I see this kind of like social aspect where it's built in. And granted, a lot of people connect through their means of suffering or judging others and, speaking lowly of others, like things that you might think like, a lot of people like connect over what you think like might actually send you to hell. And that's, I don't know, it's human, but there's also like this aspect too of our social nature where like if someone's doing something that we don't really approve of or that doesn't vibe with us in some way or another, like our tendency is to like kind of disconnect from them, or can be. And so there's like, it's kind of built into like this social thing is like, trying to keep others in check, but I don't know.
So one of the tools we used to use to manipulate people is to damn them to hell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't do that much anymore, do we?
No, but I still get the sense that like, I see that as like a fear-based control, and that we just say other things like, churches or other establishments might damn somebody else without that same verbiage,
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Jainism views the whole universe in terms of two eternal, independent, indestructible, and coexisting components, jiva and ajiva. Now, just notice that in the language itself that we can see, whatever jiva is, ajiva is the opposite. Okay? I call that a complementary construction. When you have something that's opposite, it takes the whole to create it. I talked about complement before. I'm going to end with complementary structure, but part of my thinking comes from the religions. And one of them that is clear is Jainism on how they construct their universe. Jiva is the embodied soul and the conscious, and the embodied and the conscious soul. And ajiva is the lifeless inert matter, having qualities, gunas, and atoms, paramanas. In a being, jiva is soul, the subject, the knower. Ajiva is the physical body, the object, the known, the enjoyed. For ajiva, the ajiva is a burden which reduces brilliance of its consciousness and its ability to experience bliss, which is its true nature. Okay, now make the jump. It's sort of in there. What's soul? What's jiva? What's ajiva? Body. Where have we encountered this already?
Hinduism.
Okay, Hinduism jumped into this. Yeah.
Yeah.
And by extension, Buddhism.
Yeah.
We've seen this. What was the Buddhist move in this conversation?
Well, Hinduism spoke to soul as capital S-E-L-F, self. Buddhism was without self,
Right.
and more of like a collective soul idea.
And where did Buddhism put its emphasis? If it was going to discount soul and ensoulment, where where did the Buddhist put its emphasis? We all have a body. You can't walk away from that.
Right.
The Hindus, and now we're seeing the Jains, are collecting something called a soul.
Mm-hmm.
The Buddhists have a body and a
Collective consciousness,
which they also called mind. So Buddhism put all of its emphasis in the mind. It was where it could go if it just didn't like the Hindu concept of the soul and the Atman. And so it was seeing struggles there with Atman that it wanted to release. But if you were to read Greek philosophy, if you were to read Socrates tonight, you would discover a very similar philosophy in Socrates, that of the soul and the body. The soul is better. The body creates all sorts of problems, and your job is to find that soul that is purity. So you see an awful lot of this, and it's much stronger here within Jainism, that we also discover in Greek philosophy, which is the foundation of Western philosophy. And so this we're coming back, after we come out of Buddhism, we're going back into Hinduism in a lot of things. So I just have to sort of compare Buddhism for you so you understand how we're going back into some of the soul. Though they all three are very much into karma. And karma, I really have fun with karma. Karma is sort of building its ethos in the American context. It's fun how it's sort of doing it. But karma in Jainism is really fascinating. We have bodily existence. We understand that. The soul is bound by the body. It's accompanied with desire, which we've talked about endlessly. That causes karma to accumulate. Talked about that. But that creates defilement, which is another body. The key for Jainism is karma is physical. Now, I want you to did you both go to Chuck E. Cheese? Have you both had a great experience in Chuck E. Cheese? Gone and got some pizza with somebody else in your family, or you have a memory of going to Chuck E. Cheese? Do you remember this? Did you not go to Chuck E. Cheese?
I always wanted to, and I don't think I ever got the chance.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah,
Kate,
I was like,
help us. Did you go to Chuck E. Cheese?
I know.
No, I don't think.
Oh my goodness! How come life is complete without Chuck E. Cheese? Okay, I gotta build this another way. Have you gone to a fall fair where they had a ball pit filled with plastic balls?
Yes.
Okay, well, the reason I didn't just go there is because Chuck E. Cheese always has a ball pit in it. Okay, so I want
the McDonald's up here has one.
McDonald's, there you go. And so you've got, have you ever gone into a ball pit?
For sure.
Oh, good. Kate?
Yeah.
Are you with me? Okay.
Yeah.
So you fling yourself into the ball pit and you're surrounded with these balls and you're sort of working the balls, right? That's Jainism and karma. The balls of the ball pit are karma. And you live your life literally with physical matter around you. And you're walking through a life filled with plastic balls that you call karma. And now you're trying to negotiate that. A much more aggressive form of karma. That karma isn't just this, all of these actions that are floating and reacting and doing. It is a ball that you have the chance of moving by. So karma are the balls in a ball pit. They float free until you get sticky. And desire means you want stuff to come to you. But what you're wanting is the balls of the ball pit to now stick to you. It's like you coated yourself with honey in Jainism, and now you're trying to move through the ball pit, but it's getting tougher and tougher because all the balls are sticking to you and the balls are sticky, and at some point you just can't move anymore because you're so encapsulated by karma and the balls of karma. So passions moisten the soul and karma causes it to stick to it. That clouds your pure consciousness and you get more passion and more karma, and your karma literally changes your soul. And so your greed turns into robbery, which turns into loss of your own possessions, which turns into greed, which turns into robbery, which means you've lost more of your own possessions, and life becomes more and more horrible. Okay? Do you get a sense of how karma is a little different in Jainism? Very physical, very practical, and oh my goodness, how do you stop this from happening?
Yeah.
Okay? Well, now you got a whole lot more choices in Jainism. When it comes to a rebirth, again, we talked about rebirth. It seemed to be everybody was worried that their grandmother was a cow. So that, you know, a bad grandmother might be a bad cow. And if you were really bad, you turned into one of those awful monkeys that run around the temples. The Jains have really expanded this. When you're having a rebirth, you could be any animal. Remember that mosquito? Yeah, that's why Mahavira didn't slap mosquitoes. He was worried that it might have been his friend that had a bad life. Yeah, and so he wasn't going to kill it. Remember those microscopic things that they put a mask on so they didn't have to eat? That might have been their friend, their grandmother, their uncle. But it's worse than that. You could come back as a plant. You could come back as air. You could come back as water. You could come back as hell being. And look at this final one. You could come back as a god. How horrible is that? Yeah, they have a different image of gods. They got a lot more moral leverage, folks, in their moral quiver. You could come back as a hell being, be a good person. Yeah, much more powerful moral persuasion in the Jain concept of karma. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very practical.
Yeah. And I mean that tool to keep people in moral check just seems very similar to Bible-based religions.
Well, and I'm curious, everything must be alive if you can be reincarnated as air or water. That means everything has soul, everything is living at all times. Anything you come into contact in the world with is alive.
That's right. And so that's the image that the Jains cultivate, and then you have to figure out what in the world you do with that image. It is a great challenge. So karma is inert. It is ajava. And we've talked about it being matter. It's invisible, but it's present everywhere. It's an impurity that leaves an imprint on the soul. The soul loses its freedom when it becomes bound in these vicious cycle of actions and consequences, cause and effects. And your soul has plasticity. It can adjust, and that's a problem. It has dimension. It can get bigger. It can get smaller according to the size and shape of the body which it resides. So if it's a little microscope, it's got size. It can attract karma. In the womb, it enters like a small seed. But as the body begins to grow, it also expands correspondingly to fill into its shape and size. At the end of its current corporeal life, it contracts again into a seed and leaves the body to begin a new journey in another body according to its karma. Woo! They're a lot more specific in this one. A lot more specific. Okay, so now we've sorted it out. How do we solve this problem of life is tough? I'm probably going to come back as in a weaker form. And the weaker form, if I'm really bad, is a hell being or a bad God. How do we solve this? It may be millions of lifetimes before we're born again as a human. Within Hinduism, we didn't have that pressure. It's sort of like, you might come back as a cow, but if you're a good cow, when you die, you'll come. You got a shot to come back as an untouchable. Not for a Jain. Millions of lifetimes before we're born again as a human. You have to eliminate your karmic matter now. Not trying means a lower rebirth. But there's no ultimate liberation because we're in the wrong half cycle. Remember, we're in the 24th half cycle of Jainism. Mahavira started the 24th of the 24. And so we're in a really rough place because everything's getting worse. That's the point of the wrong half cycle. And so your soul has to direct your capacity to start the change. It must be in a pure state. Well, how do I purify myself? You encounter a Jain or the image and hear the teaching. Since none of us can encounter a Jain right now, we have to go to the image and we have to hear the teaching. And so you then start up the ladder of 14 rungs. The jivas are divided into 5 categories defined by the senses. The plants have only one sense, the sense of touch. Mammals have all the 5 senses. In between these two, there are jivas having 2, 3, or 4 senses. Human beings, gods, and higher beings possess an additional 6th sense called manas, or mind, which gives them the ability to think or act rationally. The number of senses is an important criteria in selecting the right kind of food for consumption to practice the principle of non-injury. It is not possible to consume food without indulging in some form of violence or injury to living beings. It's better to select plants which only have one sense. Eating food prepared by killing animals have 2 or more senses. That leads to greater sin and adverse karma. So why are they vegetarians?
Karma.
Karma.
They want less of it.
They want less.
And correct me here. In the Jain perspective, no karma is good karma, right?
No karma is good karma. We don't get a sense. That's a great question.
I feel like in
not getting a sense of any good karma in Jainism. I agree with you.
Yeah. That's what I kind of remember from our reading.
No, that's a really one. They're not giving karma any positivity at all, are they? Oh, I've got more reading to do. Thank you.
Yeah, because what I was like, because no matter what, they're looking at karma as this like thing that sticks to you and inhibits you.
Yep.
No matter what.
Yep. No. Yeah. Whereas in Hinduism, we had both good and bad karma.
Yeah. Same with Buddhism.
We're not getting it here, are we?
No.
So all we're getting is purify yourself, get rid of the karma, get rid of the karma. The only way to go is get rid of the karma.
Right. And which Buddhism and Hinduism, that aspect of like clearing bad karma can be seen as good karma in Hinduism and Buddhism.
Yeah. Boy, there's a lot of pressure in Jainism. Okay. So what's the soul? It's found in both inanimate and animate objects. It's found everywhere in every conceivable object, not only in men and animals, but also plants, planets, stars, elements, oceans, rivers, wood, metal, and even a dew or a raindrop. That's a boatload of ensoulment. We do not see that kind of broad ensoulment in any other religion. When it rains, we don't think that a soul has just fallen on us. but the rain contains microscopic things that do have a soul. They're really forcing us to value anything with a soul. You value, and so if you value the raindrop as having a soul, then you might take care of the rain. Are you catching the logic here?
Mm-hmm.
Planetary souls, elemental souls, ethereal souls, souls living beyond the reach of our senses, invisible, subtle. The condition of the soul depends on the body it occupies, the consciousness, the condition, the innumerable souls. Ooh, there's where your spirituality comes. And again, I've got to realize when they look at like Saturn and Jupiter in alignment, they call it an 800-year event right now, and it will create a star-like vision on the winter solstice, December 21st. They're in alignment right now, and so you wonder, wow, is that what the Magi saw when they saw the star in the east? Is that the star they saw? Be interesting to work that one out. When the Jains see a star, they see a soul. Whew, I've never got to that point in my life. What if I saw a soul in Saturn? The logic is I would want to take care of Saturn. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That which has a soul, you naturally want to care for. So if we, and again, here's where our spirituality needs a Jain adjustment. If the planet is a soul, if the stars have the soul, if the universe has a soul, I had better take better care of it because it has a soul. If I do not give a soul to the planet or to the sun or to the stars, then I might abuse them. And so your moral adjustment is by ensouling things, you naturally want to take better care of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, everyone get the sort of the moral logic we're dealing with here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. Do you know if the human existence is the apex of your soul, or is like maybe being a star soul the highest that you can reach? Does that question make sense at all?
Oh, it does.
But I'd love to be a star being, a star soul.
Yeah,
Cool.
my sense, I go back to their cosmology, human, gods, crown. So the logic is that which you have has got to move past those to get to the crown. Okay? That's just my logic. Again, I need to do more reading. So it's a great question, but I think you have to be a human to be at least begin the journey to moksha.
Okay.
Can you see the Jain ladder picture on the right?
Yeah.
What's that look like, folks?
That looks like snakes and ladders.
Where did snakes and ladders come from?
Wow.
Now you know. There it is.
Huh. I've only ever heard of chutes and ladders, but
Snakes and ladders.
But the
Is that it,
original
or-
was snakes and ladders that I played as a little one. And there it is. So there's the definition of Jainism, which some little Sharpie somewhere saw and built our game out of it. Because there's the ancient description of the Jain stages, the Jain ladder to moksha.
yeah.
Okay.
So climbing ladders, ascension.
And so and so you start to see there's things that'll speed it up. What I don't see it looks like the snake in Jain is carrying you higher, whereas for us the ladders carried us higher, and the snakes took us back down to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a little change in the metaphor here. But anyway, That's the ancient Jain ladder to moksha. The first stage is ignorance. You have to awaken the soul and glimpse it through nature. And that begins to melt the karma away like ice. Your fourth stage is true insight. The soul is now on the path to moksha. It will remain in bondage until, here's the real downside to Jainism again. Look at this one. The soul will remain in bondage until half the available karma in the universe is used up. Now, how long is that going to be, and how many people is it going to take to make this happen? If you're in a ball pit, and the job is to get rid of karma, well, you awaken your soul and you glimpse pure nature, and that'll melt the karma around you like ice. You're now seeing an amazing role of community. It's going to take a whole lot of people to melt the available karma in the universe for you to begin to get to the fifth stage. How do you get to the fifth stage? Okay, so part of the issue is don't move through the ball pit, because moving through the ball pit causes karma to attach to you, and more karma to attach to the karma, and eventually you're going to stop moving. Well, stop moving. And that awaken, because that's how you shatter the ignorance. You awaken your soul, and the karma begins to melt away from you. It's like creating that energy field around you. Stop. And so you'll see now where the yoga and the meditation is a powerful force in Jainism as well, because it allows you to stop. It allows you to make sure that desire doesn't attract karma to you, and you can become aware of what you aren't aware of. So we come back to the value of yoga, the value of meditation, and that recovery of what we were seeing in the sages of Hinduism. Okay? And so now when we come to the worship and the life, it makes sense when you look at a picture of a Jain and a Jain temple that it looks a whole lot like a yoga studio.
I love it. It looks really nice.
Isn't that beautiful? I have no idea where it is. But again, you're going to want to cause the moksha of the weak to dissolve around you, and you're going to realize that your life has got to be a life of nonviolence, because every violent action is causing the balls of karma to stick to you. And so if you, and again in the picture, you might see that the focus that they're all focusing on is an image of the Jain. And so they're focusing on the Jain, and that is allowing them to begin to have, to by definition, to not be violent. If you're focusing on the image, you're doing nothing but focusing, you're not involved with anybody else, you're not causing any violence, you're not breathing anything, you're not standing on anything. So you want to do that as often as you can. So that causes you to worship. It brings you to a place where your worship is a speedball of getting rid of the karma around you. You keep your holy days because now you have more people who are doing the same thing together, and you get more of the karma melting away. You go on pilgrimages because that melts more and more and more around you. And you desperately want teachers that are going to help you, inform you on the right pathway, because that's how you get the karma to roll off of you. But the greatest thing you can do is die a holy death, fasting, so there's no desire, and meditating, so there's no movement. We're back to the fasting death. So the laity, this is what they think they can do to maintain their worship and their life. This might be a good place for a break. I'm sorry. Why don't we take 5 minutes and do what we need to do, and we'll come back and talk about worship and the Jain life. Okay? Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Oh.
How are you doing, Dr. Brian McCall?
Pretty well. Pretty well. Whenever I get a new idea, it's sort of like a lightning bolt. And I've had my new idea today.
What is it? I want
It
to hear.
always comes from reading. And I'm going to talk about it. It's my last 2 slides, so I'm going
Cool.
to talk about this. This is really fascinating. So
I'm looking forward to it.
part of tonight. Ta-da! But my dilemma is whenever I get the lightning bolt, I have to write. And I hate writing because it's so hard. So I'm trapped in my thoughts until I can get it on paper. Oh, discipline, which Ian has already figured out that's tough for me. Let's get back to where we were. There we go. All righty. Now, if you had a chance, I don't know if you've got your texts anywhere close to you, but the rules for the monastic life are defined in your in your scripture, your sacred scripture text. Learn from me with attentive minds the road shown by the wise ones. This road leads a monk who follows it to the end of all misery. What an interesting goal. Giving up the life of a householder and taking the vow to wander, a sage should know and renounce all attachments that take hold of men. A restrained monk should abstain from killing, lying, stealing, and sexual intercourse, and from desire, love, and greed. Even in his thoughts, a monk should not long for a pleasant painted house filled with the fragrance of garlands and frankincense, secured by doors and decorated with a white ceiling cloth. For in such a dwelling, a monk will find it difficult to prevent his senses from increased desire and passion. He should be content to live in a cemetery, in a deserted house, below a tree, in solitude, or in a place that has been prepared for somebody else. A well-controlled monk should live in a pure place that is not crowded and where no women live. He should not build a house or cause others to build one. Many living beings, both movable and immovable, both tiny and large, are killed when a house is being built. Therefore, a monk should abstain from building a house. The same holds good with the cooking of food and drink, and with one's causing them to be cooked. Out of compassion for living beings, one should not cook or cause another to cook. Beings which live in water and plants or in earth and wood are destroyed in food and drink. Therefore, a monk should cause nobody to cook. Nothing is so dangerous as fire, for it spreads in all directions and is able to destroy many beings. One should not light a fire. Even in his thoughts, a monk should not long for gold and silver. Indifferent alike to dirt and gold, he abstains from buying and selling. If he buys, he becomes a buyer. If he sells, he becomes a merchant. A monk is not to engage in buying and selling. A monk who is to live on alms should beg and not buy. Buying and selling is a great sin, but to live on alms is befitting. He should collect his alms in small parts according to the sutras and to avoid faults. A monk should contentedly go on his begging tour, whether he gets alms or not. A wise sage should eat not for the sake of the pleasant taste of the food, but only for the sustenance of life. He should not be dainty or eager for good food. He should restrain his tongue and be without desire. Even in his thoughts, he should not desire to be presented with flowers, to be offered a seat, to be eloquently greeted, to be offered presents, or to get a magnificent welcome and treatment. He should meditate on true things only, committing no sins and having no property. He should walk about with no care for his body until his end draws near, rejecting food when the time comes, the time of his death is near, and leaving the human body. He becomes his own master and is liberated from misery. Without property, without egoism, free from passions, he obtains absolute knowledge and reaches eternal blessedness. Thus I say. Who in the world is going to become a Jain? Let alone a Jain monk. Wow. So your initiation, you have to get rid of all your possessions. You have to abandon your name. You receive a whisk broom for gently removing insects. You pull hair from your head in 5 handfuls and you go begging. Anybody wanting to sign up my list to become a Jain tonight?
Sounds
Oh.
intense.
This is tough, isn't it, folks?
Sounds really stressful.
Above all else, non-violence against all things. No digging, no washing in the rain, no lighting fires, not to fan oneself, not to touch a living plant. Your possessions, you have a begging bowl, a whisk broom, scriptures, and a loincloth. And you're to meditate to obtain your deeper insights. And because of your lack of food, you'll get into a trance pretty quickly. Your vows are nonviolent, no falsehood, no stealing, celibacy, and no possessions. Okay? Wow, what a challenging life. What you are to do is to bathe in the morning. You go to the temple if there's one nearby. You stand respectfully in front of the Jain. Now I want you to look at that picture and realize how big that statue is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's got to be 100 feet tall. Offer food and flowers, and you have a rosary, and you say your prayers. There are 53 ceremonies within Jainism, so there's lots of projects. Your initiation is at 8, and the students adopt their cardinal virtues and the student life. What's different about Jainism to the other initiation that we've seen?
How young they start?
How young it is. Yeah, what did we typically see in most religions? They just...
Like 12, 13?
Yeah, puberty. I mean, you're an adult. Treat you like an adult. Wow, do they ever get them going early in Jainism? Marriage is like Hinduism, and your deathbed is a lot. It's very Jain. Final prayers, does repentance, abstains from food, dies in meditation. You're cremated and your ashes into the river. The Jain society, it's very much alive in India. The last number I saw was 3 million, so I'm sorry I haven't updated this. There's a close association of monks, nuns, and laity. Basically, I think it's because everybody has to be a monk. To be a Jain, it's sort of like priesthood of all believers, which is a Christian sentence that Martin Luther used to launch the Reformation. But now, Miss Kate, there's high numbers of women, twice as many as you would find within Hinduism, often widows. Why? Why are women attracted to this?
I mean, if I had to take a guess, maybe since there isn't a God image in the image of a male, it would be easier to align with this religion and devote yourself to it because it's something that is more attainable as a woman to be more like your highest ideal. Whereas when you have a religion with a male godhead, you'll never get there. Like, it's not even an option.
Excellent. I think that's very, very, so from a spiritual point of view, you're not limited because of the gender identification.
Yeah, exactly.
How about from a social point of view? We've talked about this before. How would you define this religion, and why would women be drawn to it? from the society it creates, why would it be appealing? Often widows. Any clue there?
I'm not sure.
One of the conversations we have is if the more conservative a religion is, the more appealing it is and the more it grows. Well, I can't think of a more conservative religion than Jainism. It is incredibly conservative. And that's appealing to moms because having discipline means better children. And if your kids are disciplined, you're doing better, and life will be better. And your children will take care of you if you're a widow, if you're more disciplined. If your children are undisciplined, they are not going to take care of you in your old age. They will just wander off. So my sense is it's the discipline that women want in their children that'll give them a good life. Again, we're just guessing. Moving on, there's some caste definition. So all of the castes are ejected. There is a Jain Brahmin. And it's an interesting, there, yay, Ian's coming back. Oh. Ian, have you noticed you're a bit flighty tonight? To be a member of the Jain Brahmin caste, so you have everybody else and the Jain Brahmins within Jainism. And it's those who are naturally nonviolent. Now, how might you know if you're naturally nonviolent?
You're not kicking inside your mother's womb.
There you go. You remembered. We are doing something here. Yahoo! So, why do we study the Jains? Well, these are the points that were so important to me. They are a dynamic counterpoint to the typical American worldview. I always find I learn more from someone dramatically different from me than I do if they're just like me. And so they are a dramatic counterpoint to what we live. They offer a path of discipline to control American challenges. I think you can assume if a society has problems, it only gets out of its problems if it can have greater discipline. And usually it's a religion that gives them their pathway of discipline. So we've already talked about how the Puritans, by name, had a good chance of success because their religious discipline allowed them to create a successful life. The same thing is happening here within Jainism. I cannot imagine more discipline than a Jain. Therefore, their ability to have a successful life should be easier. That's a strange logic for Americans to get their head around, but it is a well-worn pathway of success. And they give us tools to visualize our problems through a different set of glasses. Tonight, I'm being challenged to look at Saturn differently. Okay? That's a different pair of glasses that I've got to go on when I go outside and hunt for the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. I should think of Saturn better. How do I do it? I think like a Jain. I ensoul Saturn. Therefore, Saturn is important. Therefore, I should take care of Saturn. If I'm going to send a rocket ship, I shouldn't send it there and blow this stupid thing up or something. But it changes the way you visualize things that are external to you. Instead of dominating, I have to be nonviolent to them. And that's the new set of glasses that we get when we study the Jains. What else? What am I missing? Why is studying the Jains worth our time?
Well, their atheistic view is pretty unique. You know, because the majority of religions in our world, at least the main ones, have beliefs centered around a god figure. And yet this religion has still proven to be of service to people and to create a moral checks and balances.
Yeah. Well, that scripture that you read to us is just such a stark contrast to what we know and where it's just the contrast that brings in insight into like, hey, maybe there's another way of existing in the world, even though it doesn't sound appealing from my American life point of view. You can find, and when we discuss about like why they do the things they do, it does bring in fresh insight and knowledge into our lives. It's just the fact that it could be completely opposite of what we know as we are here.
Excellent. Having come out of the Black Lives Matter challenges over the last year, I think we've got to recognize the Jains for being a key part of how to solve social solutions. And if you remember, that's the pathway of the Jains that informed Mahatma Gandhi, that informed Martin Luther King, that informed the leadership of the Black Lives Matter community. And that's very real, folks. That pathway is an amazing pathway of how do we accomplish social goals without everybody grabbing their guns and shooting each other. There is a very, very powerful pathway there. And so it gives us a way of sharing knowledge that ends up where you've got another way of solving problems. And nonviolence needs as much conversation as we can figure out, because there's a whole lot of current frustration at a national level and a state level that in the past caused wars, and in American history caused the Civil War. And so you don't want to get there. You want to draw from another source when it comes to solving your discipline. Any final comment on why we study the Jains? Have you enjoyed studying the Jains?
Yes.
Yeah, I really have.
Mm-hmm. I also really appreciate their close relationship to what we know as science.
Very.
Yeah.
And the book subtitle, Living Jainism, an Ethical Science.
Nice.
They really want to anchor into science, but they're gonna broaden it from our Western narrow, the scientist that's almost always atheistic,
Mm-hmm.
And almost always despiritualizes their life.
Mm-hmm.
It's something they're going to want to break out of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I love teaching the Jains. The other major religion that we don't study is the Sikh religion. If you were to listen to how they say Sikh, but because of the way our ear doesn't like thinking of other people as Sikh, we tend to use the framing of the Sikhs. So if you get a chance in your life to study the Sikhs, that's what we're missing. In the major religions of India, we have skipped over the Sikh religion. So please, if you get time, please do that. I come back to now our little larger theme of why study health and healing in the religions of India as our theme for this course. And my goals have been to elevate the physical awareness of the benefits of religious discipline to benefit both the physical and spiritual plane. Okay, I think you guys are you're the choir when it comes to these points, but I just want to sort of say them out loud. We want to recognize the benefits of thought and practices that religion demands. We want to build a community that elevates the spiritual and health benefits. And we want to build an academic center to pass on the benefits of spirituality of the religions of India. Now you can, again, now, so I asked the same question, why should we study health and healing in the religions of India? And you can either rephrase these, you can say them all over again, or you can come up with a new one. But what in the world is studying health and healing in the religions doing for us as people and our community as an American conscious, Americanized healthcare system?
Can you ask that question again?
Why should we study health and healing in the religions of India? You've seen my reasons, give me yours.
Well, the religions of India have such a different way of thinking about spirit and soul and our existence on the earth. So where we're kind of locked into one perspective, their starkly different perspective can bring in freshness into that. And there's so many, it's just opening your eyes to all of these beautiful ways of seeing the world. And there's so much that can come out of that, where, I mean, I've found a lot of my spiritual practice from these religions. It's been inspired by Indian religions heavily, which I think is really interesting because I live in America. I grew up in Bountiful, Utah. It's just such a different way of thinking, and I didn't realize the impact that these religions have had in such a roundabout way, because I've never actually studied under someone from India or really even sought out books or anything directly from India. It's all just been kind of this like trickle down of these ideas that have reached me somehow. And it's been really great to dive into the actual facts and really study it on a deeper level. It's been really interesting.
Thank you, Kate. Ian, any comments on health and healing in the religions?
Yeah, I second Kate or what stood out to me about what Kate says. Yeah, you know, that we just, having grown up in America, like I look at like my mental health state and then how that affects the rest of my well-being, and ideas of karma and treating others with respect to be respected. I mean, just in the perspective, just in the mindfulness, there seems to be a very significant shift of my own sense of well-being. And, whether or not, and it probably does have a very biological, biochemical effect within my body. If I'm not worrying about something every second of the day, then if I'm making sense of what's happening around me, I'm not worrying about it, I'm at peace with it, then I'm not releasing cortisol and adrenaline into my body, and therefore preserving my body and extending its life. And Western medicine is like, here, just take these chemicals and it's going to throw other things in your body out of whack, but it'll solve this one symptom maybe, and it just adds to the problem. And although I see a place for it in extreme circumstances, there's like the Jain practice asks, without having a God, it's like you got to take responsibility for your own well-being. It's not somebody else's responsibility. And you know, also considering what you put in your body. You know, healthy food goes a long ways. So
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for.
And here's my work. And I define it as a complementary worldview. You guys have been around me long enough. You've heard this a few times. I'm just going to sort of redo it in just my last two slides tonight to try and put a point on Kate's question. How can we define what's going on in our current culture better? And I'm convinced that if we think like this, we will be able to define things better. And once you define them, it's like defining a disease. Before you can heal a disease, you've got to define it. Once you have a social problem, if you can define it, then you can begin healing it. And so right now, we're lacking definition because we've never gone through a pandemic before. But I'd like to define what's going on, and I think I can. And by defining it, I think I can open a pathway to how we can begin healing it. I call my worldview a complementary worldview, a complementary ethic and spirituality. The problem that I see all around me is we tend to find truth and protect it. Others tend to find the opposite truth and then protect it. Then we fight over which truth is true. And we don't seem to realize that there's a possibility that if someone has a totally different perspective, that it can't be true. It's got to be false. And so that creates our tendency to violence, is our assumption that when someone thinks differently than I do, therefore it must be false and we have to fight. But if we can find that what the other person is doing is an opposite truth, then we'll do what Jainism was doing with its ensoulment. We'll find that we have to value it because it's true. And the metaphor you can easily use is a dollar bill or a coin, and if you bring it out, you'll find that you have the front side and the back side. You need them both to make a coin, to make a bill. And so what we'll begin doing is to have what a physicist called deep truth. Bohr and Einstein were really struggling about what light is. And it's a struggle that goes back into the ages, and you'll see conversations of light in every philosopher. So every philosopher tries to figure out what light is. But Bohr and Einstein were two scholars at the beginning of the 1900s that were trying to figure out what light was. And if you go back to Newton as an interesting place to start, Newton thought that light was like your balls on a chain. And if you remember that, if you can think of that toy with 5 balls dangling, and if you pull back one and let it go, it flies through to the 5th one, and that one goes out and comes back and hits it, and then this one goes out. That's how Newton thought about light particles. That light comes from the sun, is reflected off an object, bounces through a bunch of particles, and hits you in the eye, and you can see something. So it's a very physical way of thinking about light. And it has mass. So that literally is a ball running through the air, hitting your eye that you can see. And that's what light was. And he could do experiments to prove that that was the case. And so he was quite positive that that's what light was. Well, another physicist came along after Newton had died, and he said, no, light is a wave. And light has no mass. It's just a wave that goes through the air and eventually hits your eye and you can see things. And he could do experiments and show that light was a wave and had no mass. Now, and then it started oscillating so that the next generation, they could do experiments and show that it was a particle with mass. And then the next generation could come back in and show that it was a wave with no mass. And it was going on and on and on like this until Einstein and Bohr were sitting in, they were actually writing letters. And Bohr was that came up with the definition. Folks, it's a deep truth. They're both correct. And what's happening is when you measure the truth, it's actually showing you as truth. And so when you measure it for particles, you can prove particles with mass. When you measure it for wave, you can show it a wave with no mass. They're both true. This is what we call a deep truth, and this is what we got to get used to. And so Einstein and Bohr had to come up with this concept of deep truth. When both are true, and yet they're completely opposite. And you had to get your head around that. And it's one of the features of quantum mechanics that they have to understand quantum mechanics. You have to understand what a deep truth is. Things that are opposite, and yet they're both true. And so now if we take this into how we live our lives, we've been seeing these religions have conservative wings and liberal wings. We just went out with Jainism. You're a conservative if you don't wear clothes. You're a liberal if you wear clothes. Well, what's a conservative? A conservative is one who has confidence in the past, and they study those external sources that are books. In our culture, a conservative it values the Constitution and keeps going back to the Constitution. A liberal is someone who has confidence in the future, and they use internal sources, personal enlightenment. I think we can easily see that both are true. Both define each other. A liberal is someone who is more liberal than the person beside them, and someone that thinks about internal sources instead of external sources. A conservative is someone that recognizes the books. The dilemma is if you frame yourself by saying, what I believe is true and what you believe is false, that naturally leads to war. For 500 years, Catholics have been killing Protestants and Protestants have been killing Catholics. Why? Because they assumed that Catholics believed you're saved by works and you have to run on your gerbil wheel to get to heaven. And Protestants said, nope, you're saved simply because of faith. If you believe in Jesus, you're saved. What in the world do we do with that? We've fought for 500 years. I consider myself the last Protestant trained warrior. My job was to literally kill Catholics. I could see it in the way I was trained. You guys have no concept of what that is. But my job was to kill Catholics. I could see that in the way I was formed. My dad would tell anti-Catholic jokes at the table. It was just the way our table was constructed. There were innumerable times that happened. Folks, what happened is if we say they're both true, but opposite. What if we look at the Christian way of thinking about life versus the Hindu way of living about life? One thinks of life historically in a cycle. One thinks of it as linear, from beginning, from past to future. Now, we can fight because they do fight. Hindus have said Christians are wrong, kill the Christians. Christians have said Hindus are wrong, kill the Hindus. Folks, what if we were to say they're both true? The cycle has a future. Instead of a two-dimensional cycle, what if we think of a three-dimensional cycle that has a past and a future but goes cyclically? What happens if we think like that? Then we've ensouled the Hindu, and we won't kill them. And so we can think differently. What if they're both true? A complementary worldview recognizes that one person's worldview might be the opposite of another person's worldview, and that they are one complementary worldview. Well, where do I get my sources? Well, I can look at primarily mathematics. Mathematics can help me with this. I can look at genetics. There's actually a complementary way that genetics is woven together. If you look at genetics, you'll discover that we as human beings, all we are two woven strands of what I'll shorten to as A on one side, T on the other, and that's just a complementary molecule that's the inverse of its pair. And our A, adenosine, and our T, thiosin, is a complementary molecule. We can look at G and C, and our entire living universe are complementary molecules that are woven together, that break apart, replicate, creating a complementary molecule, and then create what we now define as genetics. So our entire being are complements. Physics, I've talked about light. Biology, sociology, politics, other disciplines demand that you see complements. I've got the color wheel up there. Our color is built on complements. That's how you paint, is with complementary colors. It's even defined as that. I put in the yin and the yang. Our philosophy has been built around the yin and the yang. I love it because what it does is it's not just white and dark coming together. There's a white inside the dark and a dark inside the white. Look at that, which is trying to symbolically say, within me, I have my opposite, which is, for me, as a biological male, that means I have a feminine side deep within me, which we're all trying to figure out what that is. And if you're a female, you have a masculine side deep within you. And so it was the Chinese way of saying, I am a complementary whole, but I need to recognize my opposite parts. For me to create a male and a female, I need to come together and create a new being who will be either male or female, but they'll have male or female embedded deep within them. And so our religion, our spirituality, they need to think like this, but our ethics needs to see them as well. And what we've been doing tonight is forcing our glasses to see what happens if you don't ensoul something, you kill it. And so we need to ensoul things, or from a Buddhist tradition, give the mind that same value so that you recognize that. But what's happening in healthcare today in our hospitals? We have shifted from a patient-centered healthcare to a community-centered healthcare. If you don't think complementary, number one, you don't look at the inversion. Or if you see an inversion, you don't know what to do with it. But if you're thinking as complementary, when you realize now healthcare in a pandemic has to shift to a community-centered healthcare, you instantly realize if you see that shift, you recognize there's going to be oscillation from what is now going to be a community-centered healthcare until we get the pandemic under control, and then we're going to oscillate back to a patient-centered healthcare. You instantly be able to get to forecast what's coming at us. But you need to, first of all, help people figure out, what in the world does community-centered healthcare look like? Well, it means I'm not in charge of my healthcare. I have to think about the whole of the community, and I might have to give up something, including my life, so that the community-centered healthcare can flourish. And so it's going to force us to think completely differently while we're in a pandemic. And eventually we're going to oscillate back to a patient healthcare center, because that's who we are as Americans. But we are really going to struggle as a community-centered healthcare, because nobody has organized this or developed it in our lives. But these are compliments, folks. If we fight it, it'll trample us to death. If we accept it and give it a soul, then we're going to value it, and we'll see that it's in the best instincts. So where do I focus? So we focus, our focus on the physical must be augmented with a focus on the spiritual. And this is where I think you guys in your work will be so valuable in the future. We have got to elevate the spiritual when it comes to our healthcare. And for us, these are complements. Our physical is a complement to the spiritual. You need them both. And if either of them are out of whack, then you're going to be unhealthy. And so, but we need people that will emphasize spiritual health care so that we can elevate it into American society. We will always be physically centered. That's just the kind of culture we have. But we need folks like you that will elevate the spiritual, because it's part of the whole, and it's a crucial part of the whole. But it has to be valued as truth. And we've spent a few hundred years in American healthcare saying that spiritual healthcare is false. Spiritual healthcare is false. Kick it out, get it out of our hospitals, get it out of our settings. We've spent hundreds of years doing that. We're going to now have to figure out how to place it into a valued part of the healthcare environment. And if we do that, then we have a chance to have healthier people. But it's going to take folks like you that are going to emphasize it for as long as your journey will give you strength and courage to do it. So that's my healthcare sermon for the night. How am I doing?
That's excellent. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, really. Yep.
You guys have a huge role in American society. Huge. Okay, you've got a lot of rocks to lift and push up mountains. But you got the tools now to begin the journey. Okay. Now, next week I want to hear from you. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Your presentations are next week. We'll have to live with the problems of technology. I assume you'll both be gone. So we'll just do a Zoom kind of project. But the time is yours, and I'd love for you to really sense you've got a good half hour each to work with. And your formal presentation might only be 10 minutes, but you still take 20 minutes to help us work through it, or to work with questions, or to really advance your thinking so it becomes meaningful. Okay, so is next week coming into view?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay with presentation, taking us both somewhere? If you need any help from me this week, send me an email. I'll try and turn it around in 24 hours. If you want to change your entire project next Wednesday night, okay, do it, but it's a little harder if you try to. I hope you sort of know your trajectory and you're on a good trajectory, okay?
Yeah. Thanks,
okay,
man.
so, and I want to come back to this next week. I want you both to think about what I'm introducing to you. It's a monster topic. It's mine. I don't know of anybody else that's talking like this. I think I'm right, and I have to do it. You've seen my influences from all the religions of the world and how I got here. And it's mostly come from the spiritual side that's got me thinking like this. But my life goal is to do what you're seeing on one screen in front of you, is somehow give people the tools to think better when they encounter problems. And so this is me. So
Awesome.
that's what you get when you study with me.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, we're past time now. Final questions, comments, issues you see in front of you?
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. That's awesome.
Truly my pleasure. I can't do this without students. So
yeah, it's a great perspective.
I do it with you.
Yeah. Stoked to
All
be
right. Good night.
Okay.
See you next
Bye.
time.
See ya.
See you guys.